I will turn this over to our town manager, Christy Williams.
Good morning. So this is the presentation of the FY22 budget and capital plan. We always like to start off reminding everyone of our vision and goals. So an innovative town government trusted to provide high quality municipal and educational services that enhance quality of life and provide an inclusive and positive experience for the community. Just to give you a recap of our budget process for FY22, in the beginning of October, our capital requests were due. This was under the new capital planning policy that was approved by the Board of Selectmen in September. This policy was designed to create a process that really included all capital projects from across the town and not just ones under a certain dollar amount. That policy was reviewed by the Advisory Finance Committee as well prior to the Selectmen approval. In mid-October, we requested that departments give us their initial budget requests, and then we scheduled budget meetings with them. And in late October, last year, we did have the budget summit for the FY21 budget. Because of COVID and sort of the timing of the FY21 budget being completed, in lieu of that budget summit, we did issue a joint memo, myself and the school superintendent, talking about budget pressures for FY22. Which really centered around the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the need for budget restoration over multiple years because of all the cuts that we had made in FY21. In mid-November, myself, the assistant town manager and finance director met with the departments to go over budgets. And then we submitted our budget document to the Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen on December 18th. Today is our budget hearing and joint meeting. Budget hearing under the charter is with the Advisory Finance Committee and the Capital Expenditure Planning Committee. That typically takes place at a Board of Selectmen meeting. The reason that it's taking place during this meeting is because yesterday Governor Baker released his budget numbers for FY22. And we'll talk more about that later. And then following on what we did last year, we have a full day joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee to hear from some of the larger departments, including DPW, school, police, fire. And then we were also going to hear from recreation and conservation related to some Lake Chauncey articles. And then the closing of the town meeting warrant currently would be projected for the February 9th Board of Selectmen's meeting. This would be considering a annual town meeting on March 13th. As most of you know, the selectmen did have a discussion at their meeting on Tuesday about pushing this date to a later date in potentially May of this year, meaning that we would have more time before we were to close the town meeting warrant. As you know, this is the second year in a row that we've done the GFOA budget document best practices. So it is inclusive of the Citizens Guide, org chart, community profile. All of the departments have provided their mission, successes and accomplishments, personnel information, short and long-term goals, as well as their budget figures. And then the appendix has additional information related to the budget. With this year, we've also included a debt maturity schedule, as well as a road management plan. We have received a lot of really great feedback from the public related to this document and the ease of understanding the information that we put out. Some updates to the budget document. As we talk about all the time, the budget numbers are always changing. And so we want to make you aware of some of the changes that we've found since we published on December 18th. So you can see here, unrestricted general government. We had budgeted in your budget document, we had budgeted level funding of state aid, not knowing what was going to happen in FY22. The governor's budget that he released yesterday afternoon did give us a small increase in state aid of about $24,000. We heard from the lieutenant governor last week that our increase would be about 3.5%, which it was, though some of our offsets went up as well. Chapter 70, the budget document anticipated level funding of Chapter 70, except for the additional anticipated $808,000 for the full day kindergarten, which we talked a lot about last year. The governor's budget that came out yesterday actually increased our Chapter 70 amount by almost $3 million. that amount, Westboro is really an outlier in the governor's budget, with our Chapter 70 going up about 30%. It's inconsistent with other towns, and so while I'm showing that number here, the numbers that we go forward with are not going to capture that full increase until we're able to better understand and confirm that number. Our Worcester Regional Assessment went up from the budget document about $195,000, and our cherry sheet charges went up about $117,000. Some outstanding items. Last year, this slide showed you several contracts that were outstanding. This year, we don't have any contracts outstanding. The insurance budget is one that's always outstanding at this time because we're always looking for additional experience to drive and how that drives the rates. We are expecting, like last year, that our rates will actually stay frozen at the same level. Though in your budget document, we've estimated a 2% increase, which we've been told from our consultants is conservative. So if there's any savings, we would, once we finalize those numbers, we could potentially adjust the insurance budget. Assabet Valley, we don't have the final assessment from Assabet Valley. They also were waiting on the governor's budget number. So we expect that in the next few weeks, or maybe the next few days, that we'll receive that final assessment. And then the library renovation project, that's obviously not an operating budget expense, but something that we wanted to keep at top of mind because we know that that's something that's upcoming before town meeting. And it was discussed in the capital planning process, the need for the library to update their cost estimates this year. This shows a budget comparison from FY21. So a total 4.93% increase over FY21, with the largest percentage increases being the Worcester County retirement and cherry sheet assessments, and then also the Country Club Enterprise. As a reminder, the management of the Country Club is going from the contract manager to the employee position under the Recreation Department. And so we've budgeted within the general fund about $153,000, which is outside of the enterprise account. And looking at the budget documents this year, you saw some changes to the organization. We combined budgets for information technology as well as the communications budget. The IT director was already managing that budget, though it was under the town manager. So now we've moved it just into the IT budget. The finance department, which was created a couple years ago, has been functioning really as one department. So we've combined their budgets. This was also a recommendation of the staffing study. And then the Department of Public Works, you'll see the buildings and grounds budget in that section to be fully combined in future years. As you know, there's an article on the town meeting warrant that would formally combine that department, those two departments, and put the buildings and grounds or facilities budget as a division of the Department of Public Works. And this was also a recommendation of the staffing study. The FY22 budget does show some restoration from cuts that we made related to COVID-19, but there are cuts that we have continued. As I stated earlier, we expect that the restoration of these budgets is going to be a multi-year process. One of the things that we continue to leave off is the hazardous waste day. That was something that we had cut last year due to COVID-19. OPEB funding, we in the past have budgeted $1.1 million every year into OPEB. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had talked about reducing that amount based on just to give relief to the taxpayer. But then in the COVID-19 budget cuts, we did reduce that amount to zero, and it continues as zero in FY22. Again, this would be a long-term plan at restoration of that budget item. Department of Public Works seasonal positions has also been reduced in the FY22 budget, consistent with FY21. Training and travel lines, any training and travel lines that we cut in the FY21 budget, we've continued into FY22, not knowing what the training and travel will look like over the next year. And then some overtime that we had cut, we continue to cut in those departments. Our biggest impact specifically in the town departments has been salary. Our expenses have gone up about $44,000, and the rest of our increase is related to salary. And so these are just some of the impacts that these are the largest impacts that we're experiencing relating to salary in FY22. The largest one being the fire department. We've talked about this every year since we've approved the SAFER grant, that the SAFER grant would fall off over 3 years. So the SAFER grant is going to expire in November of FY22, increasing the town's financial responsibility from 48% in fiscal 22 to 88% of the cost of the additional firefighters. So this is the largest impact year for the SAFER grant, and that's a $234,484 cost. The Council on Aging outreach workers, we had in FY21 as a way to respond to COVID-19, we had used gift funds that were given to the Senior Center for Outreach to fund half of the cost of the salaries for the Council on Aging outreach workers. This was presented as a one-time strategy, and so we're restoring that in the FY22 budget. These are not new positions. In the library, they had a vacancy in FY21, and we had invoked a hiring freeze, so they had not filled that position. And looking ahead to FY22, we've actually adjusted the position that was vacant, and we've created part-time positions. So we've reduced the library by one benefit eligible position, and we've actually recognized a cost savings in FY22. Human resources coordinator, that was something that was recommended by the staffing study. We did create that position during fiscal 21 using funds from a position that we did not fill in the treasurer collector's office, moving a lot of the responsibility of that previous position into the HR coordinator position, but also giving this position additional responsibility related to human resources. And so in FY22, there's an additional cost increase because this position is classified higher than the previous administrative assistant position in the treasurer's office. Golf course management, I had already mentioned, that was previously a contracted position. And so the additional cost is the $153,178. And then in community development, in October, we had approved elevating the building commissioner to the community development director position for half of FY21. So that went into effect in January of this year. But in FY22, we're funding at the current classification for the entire year, which is an increase of $10,460. And then other salary impacts related to restoration and COVID-19 is the economic development director. That we had funded in FY21 for only half the year. So funding it for the full year is the $36,000. A DPW laborer position, we brought that back at the October town meeting. So funding it for the full year in 22 is an additional $41,000. And then the police department, we added a police officer that we had intended to add. And one of the police officer positions we had intended to add in FY21, we did add in October. And so funding of that for the full fiscal 22 is an additional $31,000. So we have not added any new positions for FY22, but in restoring positions over time, we are showing a large increase because we're going from funding partial year to funding for a full year. So the items above and on the previous slide represent 3.61% of the 6.56% that the town has increased in salary and wages. In looking at strategic plan priorities that are budgeted in FY22, we did have that one additional officer added in FY21, so that's the $31,000. Proactive public safety, fire department staffing, again, that's the additional $234 related to the SAFER grant falling off. We do have the tuition reimbursement article, which will increase by $14,000. And then the staffing study changes, which I already spoke of. So the community development director and the HR coordinator, that's the additional $18,744 in FY22. And then supporting the construction costs of the new library, where the library grant is expected in FY23, but to update cost estimates this year, the library is proposing using $100,000 of trust funds to update cost estimates. So again, using the increase that the governor put out yesterday for the unrestricted and general government local aid, and also recognizing the $808,000 for the full day kindergarten, but not recognizing any additional increase in Chapter 70. This presentation projects a $524 increase to the average single family in FY22. This is just a comparison with our data dashboard towns for FY21 tax bills, and you can see that Westboro is in the middle in the green. When we look at the town's total financial position, we also are looking at reserves. So as we talked about for FY21, in order to lower the tax rate, we did use free cash in FY21. We used $770,000 of free cash to lower the tax rate. The FY22 budget also recommends using that $770,000 in free cash to lower the tax rate. And so this slide here shows the use of that $770,000 in free cash, as well as the $250,000 that we use for the AFC Reserve Fund, which would put our total reserves at 14% of our general fund operating budget, which is well within our goals in the comprehensive fiscal management policy. This just shows free cash certified for FY20 compared to our data dashboard communities. And this shows our total town reserves split out. So our free cash goal is 5 to 7% of the general fund. We're currently at 11.25%. Stabilization's 5 to 7.5%. We talk about this a lot, about stabilization looking a little low and free cash looking a little high, understanding that free cash is more accessible for use by the community. And so the combined goal of the 10 to 15%, we're still within. Other financial resources. Other financial resources that we have are the sale of real estate account, open space, Wacom Robinson Trust. These are things that we talked about a lot this year when we talked about land purchase. So this is where those accounts are at as of the purchase of both Belknap and Eli Whitney. This shows excess levy capacity. You can see that using the assumptions that I discussed, so no increase at this point in Chapter 70 except for the kindergarten, we would be reducing the town's excess levy capacity in FY22. And this just shows our this slide's wrong. No. This is supposed to show the data dashboard, so we'll fix that before we post it, but this is the same slide. And so we just want to talk about managing the impact of what we understand to be a large increase in the FY22 to the average single family. So again, I mentioned that in FY21, we had proposed and we did vote to use $770,000 of free cash to lower the tax rate. And we're proposing that again in FY22. If we choose not to use that additional money, then the increase to the average single family would be about $618, and we reduce our excess levy capacity by almost 1.5 million. If you use the current estimates that I discussed with the $770,000, with the $770,000, then it would be a $524 increase to the average single family, and the decrease of about $680,000 to the excess levy capacity. And then if the governor's numbers come in as on the cherry sheet, we could reduce the use of the free cash completely to zero, and then the increase to the average single family would be $365 with an increase to excess levy capacity of $604,000. If the governor's numbers don't come in the way that they are currently presented, the finance team will need to work on a multi-year approach to reducing the use of free cash over time, as our comprehensive fiscal management policies call for use of free cash during emergencies, which we feel the pandemic is one, but then going forward would really just be for one-time expenses. This just shows local aid growth over since FY19. This does show the governor's number, large Chapter 70 number. The budget assumes estimated receipts stay level with FY21. So when we talked about changes to the COVID-19 budgets that we put forward, we told you that we were estimating a 19.5% reduction in estimated receipts, largely in motor vehicle excise, hotel, motel, meals tax, and investment income. We continue to monitor those, but in fiscal 21, we are hitting targets that we had estimated. We did keep that level for FY22 because there are still a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns about vaccinations. There's a lot of unknowns about variant strains of the COVID-19 virus and how those would respond. And there's really a lot of unknowns about how people will do business here and across the country post COVID-19 pandemic, meaning, will businesses still be leasing these large buildings and still have people coming into the office as they were prior to the pandemic. Going back to the capital planning policy, as I said, we did adopt the new capital planning policy with the goal of really bringing all of our capital projects into one document. I think we made really great strides this year and we'll continue to work forward. We continue to have the capital projects should equal 1 to 1.5% of the general fund operating budget. If you look at, these are the proposed capital projects for FY22. So if the total free cash articles do equal within that range, that 1.27%, now that we're including larger projects, we'll probably want to go back and revisit the way that we phrase the previous slide, which is that 1 to 1.5% of the general fund operating budget. So you can see here that we have projects from several different departments with multiple funding sources. And so if we were to move forward with all of these projects, we would reduce the percentage of reserves from that 14.1% that I had shown earlier to 12.73%. So we would remain within the goal. However, we have reached out to all the department heads and have talked to them about the possibility of holding off on some of these projects until the October town meeting, as we did in FY21, just so we can better understand, how the economy is going to respond to the pandemic, given the current state of vaccinations. Next steps for the finance team is to continue to look at the capital plan, determine appropriate timing of funding by town meeting, continue to look at those outstanding items like the asset assessment as well as insurance budget. Local aid, we really need to work to understand the town's actual Chapter 70 estimates, and then really understanding how we want to respond to any savings or revenue recognition. In the past, we would have just lowered the average single family tax bill when we receive additional savings or revenue. Now we have the $770,000 of free cash that we use. We also have the zeroed out OPEB budget line item. And then we have budget restoration, which has not come back completely on either the town or school budgets. And so there's opportunity there also to restore budgets. And so we end with the town of Westboro vision. Westboro, a vibrant, inclusive, safe, attractive, connected, and engaged community for a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christy. There were a couple of questions that popped up in the chat, and I'm sure that there are questions. So I guess we'll intermix. Kim, have we seen any from the public come through?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Just want to make sure that we work those into the mix. So Sean, I thought the best way to do this would be for us to sort of alternate between the boards and Steve, sorry not to exclude you, as well as from the Capital Expenditures Committee. Sound like a plan?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So we'll start with the Board of Selectmen. Syed, I saw you just raise your hand. Go ahead.
So, Christy, thank you for that excellent presentation. I just had a couple of questions. One, when we had met earlier in the year, and I know we've talked about this several times, we had talked about looking at our fee schedule and potentially revising it. Does this budget include any revisions to the fee schedule by any chance? That's my first question.
No, it doesn't include any revisions to the fee schedule. We continue to look at fees, but the selectmen would need to approve those, and nothing has been brought before you yet.
Okay, is that going to be a priority? I mean, because potentially if there are other sources of, if there's other ways to mitigate that would, bring additional revenue to the town. Are we going to be discussing that before? Or I'm raising it to my own board that I think that should be a discussion we should be having sooner rather than later.
So certainly that's up to the Board of Selectmen. Again, with everything, that was a goal this year, with everything going on with the pandemic, and the fees that we're looking at are not going to have huge impacts on our revenues. I think you have also brought forward an interest in finding alternative revenue sources versus just reviewing our fees, which is a different conversation, and something that I think would take a lot of work in terms of identifying sort of specifics. And that I don't think will be done in time for this budget to be put before town meeting.
Okay, and then the second, I guess, is a kind of a more philosophical question. One of the things that we talk about frequently is the impact to the average single family, right? So the average single family. One of the things I just want to make sure, and I don't know if our town assessor is on the call and maybe he can help clarify this. Correct me if I'm wrong. For instance, if you live on if you have your house is worth whatever it's worth, but if your neighbor sells their house, right, in this year or in the prior or in your neighborhood, the assessment for that neighborhood then goes up by the new sales price. Am I correct in this when I say this?
This is John Steinberg, Chief Assessor.
Oh, John, we just lost you. John, we can't hear you. Can anyone else hear John? Because I can't. Okay, John, hold on.
Can you not hear John?
No,
No, I can't.
no, we cannot.
Here, hang on.
Somebody hold up a sign.
I
There you go. I'll slide over. Can you hear me now?
In the meantime,
Yes.
Mike, ready, I'll create that. Thank you.
Yes, please, John.
So the answer is that the values follow the market. So a single sale in a neighborhood certainly doesn't bring up a particular home. But as the market goes up, if the entire neighborhood goes up, the values of the homes go up, which follow.
No, that's
So the thing to bear in mind, though, however, if the market as a whole in town is going up, that could have a negative impact, could have a positive impact and bring the tax rate down. So it's not just the value of the home. However, as the average single family home that's used in this equation goes up, you are multiplying by a higher number. So there is a component of that to take into account, but in theory, that's the same house which would have gone up in value. So
right. But I guess what I'm saying is, and the reason I'm getting to this is, John, I know you monitor home sales in Westboro. despite this pandemic, home sales in Westboro are robust, and people are paying a premium to buy homes in Westboro. Am I correct in this?
You're absolutely correct, and that is throughout the area. The residential real estate market has been very strong, and people are
Right.
once again paying over asking. But bear in mind that is often a segment thing. So not all segments and price points within the market are doing the same thing. So sometimes you can have the high end coming down, the low end going up, the middle doing different things. So the impact of the average single family home cannot necessarily be extracted simply from limited samples within the market. But yes, the residential market has continued to be strong.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that because the residential market continues to be strong and puts an upward pressure on home values, right, it eventually transmits into the average single, quote unquote, average single taxpayer, not just seeing an increase from the town on their tax bill, but also seeing that the increase is potentially higher because of the value of the real estate in the town is going up. Would that be at least a somewhat correct assessment or a correct statement?
Well, I mean, there's a ratio. So if all the value in the town went up and there was no impact on spending, then the tax rate would come down. You know, so it's not as binary as simply saying because because your home went up in value, your taxes necessarily go up. I mean, it's the values are the values. Again, if all the values went up the same and the spending didn't change, the rate would come down. So I understand your point, and it's somewhat simplifying things, but it's not necessarily a direct correlation of one to the other. While it is a factor in the math, it's not necessarily saying because your home value is going up, your taxes are going up. It needs to be accompanied by an increase in budget or an offset and decrease in other values.
Okay. Thank you, John. The reason to my board at least, the reason I bring this up is that, you know, and Christy alluded to this, that we do not know how this year is going to turn out. There are still a lot of variables in flux. Unemployment is still very, very high. It's hard to a lot of big retailers have closed. It is hard to understand how things will, where and how things will line up. I understand that there are things that we as a town need to do. But, you know, if you, quote unquote, are that average single family person who, you know, potentially, you know, is this could be a major impact, especially if you have lost your job. And so if you look at the governor's budget, if you look, and Christy can perhaps speak to this, they've only increased, they got some additional money, but they have just increased their budget by 1%. Their budget has not gone up by like 4%. The governor's budget, yeah, granted he's given extra money, but that's coming through additional revenue, one-time expenditures. But the state as a whole has only increased its budget by 1%. And so I think that we need to seriously think about how much of a hit we want to give people this year, especially since we don't know how many of them will have jobs by the year's end. I'll just stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Selectman Hashmi. Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shelby. Is there anybody on the AFC who would like to ask a question? No folks can raise a hand or.
I'd like to ask a question, please.
Sure, Mike.
Christy, assuming the governor's numbers all drop in our favor, and I know it's a big assumption to make, you suggested that we withhold that $770,000 reduction on taxes. And I'm wondering if we do receive all the funds we're supposed to receive from the state, why not continue that and reduce the tax burden even more? Or as an alternative, why not use that $770,000 to start refunding sorry, putting back into place our OPEB contributions so that we're not stuck 2 or 3 years down the road or more with a very large debt to OPEB.
So the $770,000 in free cash is really a hole that the town needs to bring itself out of. And so in FY22, we didn't feel like we could even recommend reducing that at all. And again, the use of free cash is really for emergency or one-time expenses. So it's really important that over time, we reduce that use of free cash. If the governor's budget comes in with that large of an increase, it's not something that we would expect to continue to get in terms of that large of an increase year over year. And so we would be able to simply use that additional local aid to completely eliminate the use of free cash in our budget, so that we're not continuing to increase the tax bill every year as we try to decrease the amount of free cash used. In terms of using the money to OPEB, we've started that discussion. We started that discussion when we saw that almost $3 million yesterday. I think that that's something we could continue to discuss, where we would eliminate the use of free cash to lower the tax rate, and then potentially use some free cash to put towards OPEB. So I think that that's a discussion that if the numbers do come in as proposed, that we would have, and we would eliminate the 770, but then talk about using some free cash to fund OPEB.
Thank you.
Andrew, you have a question?
I do, thank you. Looking at the country club budget, I understand where the extra $150,000 comes in for the new staff that are going to be supporting the country club, but there's also a line in the country club 5700C, which is the superintendent contract, and it appears that that number actually has ticked up a little bit to over $230,000, $239,000. So with the addition of the staff, could you help me understand why the superintendent contract remains on the budget?
The superintendent responsibilities has nothing to do with the responsibilities of the golf club manager. So the golf club manager would become the employee, and the superintendent, the maintenance of the golf course would continue under the current contract that we have.
Andrew, you?
Yeah, I hear that. I guess I would have thought that the addition of internal staff would have equated to a savings somewhere down the line for the country club. Otherwise, we've just taken an asset which is struggling to break even and added $150,000 in cost to it. And maybe I'm just misreading what the play is here for the long-term viability.
So there was, to my knowledge, there's never been a discussion about adding additional staff to support the maintenance needs of the country club. And at this point, that continues under the contract. In terms of the additional cost of the employee position, certainly I think we've heard from the country club operating committee that the expectation is that we'll be able to do things under this new model to increase revenue. And so hopefully, in the future, we won't see that $153,000 to the general fund, and it could be covered by the enterprise fund. But at this point, that's not the case. And so we were able to project about $500,000 in revenue in the enterprise fund, and then the remaining is that $153,000.
Thank you for the clarification.
Jody, you have a question? Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. This is just asking for clarification on some of the numbers that Christy presented to us. And I looked at the chart that said that what the tax increases were for FY 2020, 2021, and 2022. So the increase in 2020 on the average tax bill was $277. In FY21, it was $228, but that the budget we have before us has an increase of $524 for the average home owner. But you mentioned if the governor's number comes in, that increase would be $365 per household. But you made one reference to asking all of your departments to go back and possibly look for decreases. Are you looking to try and level out those increases rather than having a spike in this very unpredictable year?
No. So, well, yes, that would be great. But there's, like, as I mentioned on the town departments, the increase to expenses was about $40,000. So our increase is fully salary. And as I mentioned, more than half of that increase is due to the SAFER grant falling off, which again, the chief and the previous town manager were clear about how that would work at town meeting, obviously not anticipating a pandemic in the same year that we would be most impacted by the SAFER grant falling off. And then also in budget restoration, because for FY21, we had zeroed out some positions or only funded them for a portion of the year. And so it looks like a much larger increase than it would have if we had not partially funded those positions. Certainly, as I stated, we did level fund our estimates for local receipts. We don't know. I mean, we really don't know. Typically, we can forecast and estimate, and we are conservative. But in this year, we feel like we need to be even more conservative because we really don't know, how the economy is going to respond on July 1st. And so, so certainly there's a possibility that those revenues will come in higher, but we don't know. I don't want to make any promises, but as a reminder, last year we had anticipated a $456 increase to the average single family at this point. So numbers certainly change. They could change for the better or the worse.
Hank, you have a question?
I've got my answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hank. I know I see John Steinberg on here. Do you have a follow-up or? Oh, no, you good? Can't hear you.
He's all set.
Okay. Melanie, please, floor is yours.
So I have a question following up Mr. Beretti's question on OPEB. So in your presentation, you talked to a multi-year reinstatement of that. What is that going to look like?
It's multi-year reinstatement of all of the budget items that were cut for FY21. And so that's inclusive of OPEB, but it's also inclusive of those other items that I mentioned. So training and travel line items, some positions that are still outstanding, overtime that we had cut, and the school certainly, is also doing a multi-year restoration. So I don't have an answer as to what that would look like in terms of specifically OPEB, but we know that we want to go back to funding it. This discussion related to OPEB started before the pandemic and something that the finance team was committed to looking at prior to the pandemic when we really were budgeting the FY21 budget all year. So I don't have a specific answer, but it would be a multi-year. We wouldn't anticipate just increasing back up to that 1.1 million in one single budget year.
Melanie, you have any follow-up or?
Well, no, I'm just thinking, because I've lived in other regions of the country where this has taken place, where there's been underfunding, and then there's a huge scramble. So I guess I'm just trying to get some clarity with regard to, when people say multi-year, how long are we talking? Because if you look at it, we're going to be behind the 8 ball in the next fiscal year, 3 million, correct? Because we had been funding it higher than it needed to be, but we're going 2 years without.
So we weren't funding our full arc. The 1.1 million, that number was arrived at in because of health insurance negotiations in 2014, and the savings that the town recognized was that 1.1 million. So that's where that number came from. So rather than reduce the budget based on savings in that year, we started funding OPEB using the 1.1 million per year. Certainly, the number is a large number, and we are not close to it, and that's not unique to Westboro. That's true in towns across the Commonwealth, where some towns are not even funding OPEB. The strategy that a lot of towns have taken, and one that we've talked about for years, is that when we fully funded our retirement, that we would use that money to fund OPEB. But we don't have a funding schedule in place at this point, or we don't have a funding policy in place at this point.
Does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any other hands.
I have one more question.
Oh, sure, Mike.
Thank you. Christy, it's kind of a general question, but I'd like your take. Have any of our department heads come to you with any concerns about maintaining current service levels to the town in the upcoming fiscal year?
No, I mean, we haven't heard that people are concerned about maintaining current service level. I would say that, obviously some departments have a much larger role in the COVID-19 response. And so those departments have shifted focus to responding to COVID-19, and that may impact other programs or services that they would otherwise provide. I guess I would also say that, that we did have a staffing implementation plan for the police department. And so I'm sure you'll hear from the chief later today that, this will be the second year where we haven't followed that plan. Last year, we only added 1 police officer versus 3. This year, we're not recommending any additional positions inclusive of the police department. And so I know that, that's something that the chief is looking to get back on track, and, as am I.
Well, I guess maybe it's good news in a way that we've become a little more efficient in the way we operate. And hopefully we can continue that thinking as we go into the new fiscal year and beyond. So that's just my observation, but thank you.
So if there are, I see that there may be members of the public who have joined. If you would like to ask a question, there's a raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. If you're just here to observe, that's fine too. Alan, help me out because I'm not sure I can see the whole board. Is there anyone from the public raising their hand, Alan? I don't see one. Okay. Alan, you had a question?
Yeah, well, just more of a comment. I mean, we've as part of this discussion, we've talked about, obviously we all share concern about the impact on taxpayers, particularly, the continued impact of the pandemic and people's personal financial situations, and recognizing that, when we look at the expense side of the budget, given that all the cuts that have been made in the level funding, and really only a $40,000 increase, that the majority of the increase we're seeing is on the personnel side. The challenge is, any reduction in personnel, particularly since we've held some positions off, would result in reduction of services and direct impact on the services the town provides. And that's always a challenging balance as we look at the impact. I think the surprise on the cherry sheet, hopefully it's not false hope, and that something along those lines come to fruition, because we are looking at a pretty significant swing in impact. And the question at this point is, personally, I'm not sure I'm ready to start making decisions on what services we should be reducing to the community. particularly since some of the departments have and will continue to play such a key role in COVID-19 response and the health and safety of the public and the long-term, near-term and long-term well-being of the town. So, sort of a perspective with respect to the overall impact and the overall budget. I think we're fairly lean going forward. We may have some options, seeing how the governor's budget and the play out.
Ellen, okay, you're all set because your video's frozen there.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Morning.
Can I just respond?
Yes, of course. Go ahead, Christina.
I think, we're all sensitive to the fact that increase of over $500 is significant. And, certainly we would love to reduce our use of free cash and lowering the tax rate. And but we thought it was important to put forward because we did recognize the increase as significant. But I would say that, some of this is that budget restoration of positions. A lot of it is the budget restoration of positions and also the falling off of the grant. And, that's the reason, in response to Mike's question, that's the reason that departments aren't coming forward saying that they're not going to be able to provide services, because we've restored most of the positions that we had cut in FY21. And so, I think that, it's important to remember that one of the reasons that this number is looking so high is because of our anticipated level funding of the local receipt estimates. And so because we know that has, has gone down and may continue to go down, that has a significant impact.
Oh, understood. I mean, I'm generally speaking in support. I'm not.
No, I understand. I just wanted to follow on your support. I didn't.
We look at some of the positions. Being involved in the Economic Development Committee, and you can argue, well, can't we postpone, bringing on an economic development coordinator? It's like, well, yes, that saves personnel costs in the budget, but it's dramatically hampering our ability to support business development. And as we've had some several vacancies appear in town with businesses, and while we have had some other businesses move in and open, if we want the commercial contribution to those fees, if we want the commercial contribution to the tax levy, then we need to have the resources to do it. So it's always this tough balance, but I think we're striking the best balance we can, and hopefully the cherry sheet numbers come through as currently projected. And there was no typo involved. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We've
Thanks.
got a few more people who've joined who may have questions. So
Yep. So I think the easiest thing to do is I do see the raised hand view here. So I'll take the questions in order. Sean, if you're okay with that, that seems to be the easiest way to do that. And if there are folks from the public who aren't familiar with that function, I'll keep an eye out for your visibly raised hand and call on you as we work through the process here. So I think Andrew from AFC, you have a question?
Nope, sorry, my question was already answered.
Okay, I think you can unraise your hand. Hank Roush, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, my question was answered. Thank you. I unraised my hand.
Okay, all right. Melanie Board from AFC, do you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay, Selectman Hashmi, I know that you raised your hand.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to kind of offer a different opinion to what Selectman Edinburgh said. I just wanted to find out, and this is one of the things I wanted to find out, what is the data on the effectiveness of a community development person? I mean, did they play a role in getting us for any of the large developments such as Amazon moving in? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that happened without any involvement of the community development person. I don't think they had that. Did the potential move of the Mass General site in Westboro, did that require any involvement of the community development person? There was no one at that site. That happened without that. So I recognize that there's already a Chamber 9 Commerce. There are other business avenues. So I'm wondering.
Syed, we lost your audio. We lost you so I'm wondering.
Shelby, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, we have, what I was saying is, we've had certain major developments that have occurred despite us not having. So I'm just wondering, is there any objective data that quantifies, the impact of a development person when we've had certain developments in our town without this person currently?
So, I would say we don't have any specific data, but we certainly have examples of companies that have come here that have worked directly with the town, specifically on getting TIFs. Also, we recognize other communities that have successful economic development positions and departments that are able to be proactive in going out and supporting businesses, bringing businesses in. I think that we're seeing that not having someone in that position has been, we've certainly lost that relationship. And we've tried to fill in as much as we can with the committee, as well as Kim, our assistant town manager, has done a lot of work to support that committee. But there is a real advantage to having someone in that position.
And I would go on to say that, with town staff, with Kim stepping up, it's, we're barely getting the minimum done because we don't have the resources necessary. So, we've received, we're part of a grant program with the state. We've got a grant program with matching funds, storefronts in our downtown district, but we actually don't have staff dedicated to market and run that program. Businesses. We've, the outreach, the marketing of the community, the engagement. The EDC is a committee, and the volunteer is there to provide guidance and set policy and consist. But without the staff resources, it's hard to execute.
Absolutely.
And we see a lot of interest from the community, for example, in increasing the vibrancy and diversity of the type of businesses in our downtown district, which is to quality of life, and it's also to town revenues, and to the tax base. And so it's definitely a position that's lacking, that is putting us, yes, we've had these move in, and a lot of that has to do with changes we've made to zoning and our willingness to go after mass work grants for infrastructure to make those developments possible. And we certainly want to see those continue. But historically, a lot of the expansion with some of the businesses in town, such as Coughlin, the community development person and resources at the time were instrumental in that expansion, and in helping that company navigate the process to do several expansions in town. So it's one of those, if you want the return on investment, you do need to make that investment.
So,
Am I the only one appreciating the guy brushing his teeth in the background?
yeah. So, Syed, did you have any follow-on questions or comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Shelby.
Okay, just want to make sure. I believe there's a member of the public under the name of Bellman that visually raised a hand. Mr. Bellman, did you raise your hand? Okay. Nope. Okay. No raising the hand. Okay. Hank Roush, you have your hand raised.
My screen says it's lowered.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's okay. Melanie, do you still have your hand raised? No.
Lowered.
Okay. Okay. Just still showing on mine. Thank you. Okay. Are there I don't see any other hands raised. Christy, from Kim's view, are there any members of the public?
Nope, there's no one else.
Okay. Okay. We are at 9:36. And I think that was sort of, I don't know if we got lucky or or it's good planning. But at this point, I think I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I
Shawnee,
move we close the public hearing. The fiscal 22 budget public hearing.
Bradley, second that.
okay. I think, can we take a mixed, I'm not sure what the protocol, can we take a mixed motion here? I don't want to have to do a roll call of everyone. I'll take a motion from Selectman Hashmi if he wants to keep it neat.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead. Shelby.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, roll call vote of the Board of Selectmen to close the meeting. Selectman Edinburgh,
Yes.
Selectman Hashmi,
Yes.
and I believe Selectman Johnson is back.
Yes.
Thank you. And Selectman Marshall, yes, that's 4-0-0 to close the public meeting. Again, Christy, help me out here.